One civilization controlled an area the size of half the United States. It stretched from the frozen borderlands of Scotland to the scorching deserts of North Africa. Roughly 1 in every 4 people alive on the planet lived inside its borders. It built roads that are still used today. It gave the Western world its languages, its legal systems, and its calendar. And then, after more than 1,000 years, it collapsed. But how did a small cluster of huts, on the banks of a river in central Italy, become the most powerful empire the ancient world had ever seen? What happened inside it that history books leave out? And why, after over a millennium, did it fall apart, not in one single moment, but piece by piece? This is the story of the Roman Empire. The origin story begins with murder, wolves, and the gods themselves. According to legend, Rome was founded on April the 21st, 753 BC, by twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, sons of Mars, the god of war. A jealous king ordered them drowned as infants. Instead, their basket washed ashore, where a she-wolf found them and nursed them as her own. They survived. They grew. And when the time finally came to build a city together, they quarreled over who would rule it. Romulus killed Remus, named the city after himself. Rome. Now, historians are clear that this is myth rather than fact. The real Rome began as a modest Iron Age farming settlement, built on 7 hills beside the Tiber River. But the myth reveals everything about Roman identity. These were a people who believed they were descended from gods and destined for greatness. For 12 centuries they acted like it. By 509 BC, Rome had overthrown its last king and built a republic. 2 elected officials, called consuls, governed together, with each one able to cancel the other's decisions. No single man could hold absolute power. The Romans even had a specific word for a man who ruled alone. Tyrannus. Tyrant. The worst thing a Roman could become. That system gave Rome stability. And stability brought expansion. By the 2nd century BC, after a series of brutal wars against the great North African Empire of Carthage, Rome controlled the entire Mediterranean world. But power on that scale always creates the same problem. Generals who conquer vast territories earn the personal loyalty of their armies. Their wealth eclipses the Senate's. And sooner or later, the temptation to use that power at home becomes irresistible. Julius Caesar was the man who acted on it. After conquering modern-day France and Belgium, he crossed the Rubicon River in 49 BC with his army. It was illegal under Roman law, a direct declaration of war against his own republic. By 44 BC, he had been declared dictator for life, wearing purple robes and erecting statues of himself across the city. Then, on the 15th of March, 44 BC, a group of senators stabbed him to death on the Senate floor. They believed they were saving the Republic. They were wrong. Caesar's death triggered a civil war that destroyed the Republic entirely. The man who emerged from that chaos was Caesar's 19-year-old great-nephew, Octavian. After defeating every rival that stood in his way, he stood alone as master of the Roman world by 27 BC. Octavian had watched what happened to Caesar. He knew Romans despised the word king, so he never used it. He called himself simply first citizen. The Senate gave him extraordinary powers and a new name, Augustus, the revered one. The Roman Empire had begun, not through a royal proclamation, not through a conquest, but through one of history's most elegant political maneuvers. Under Augustus, Rome entered its golden era. Roads connected every corner of the empire. Aqueducts delivered fresh water to cities of hundreds of thousands. Trade routes stretched all the way from Britain to Persia. The population reached somewhere between 55 and 70 million people during what became known as the Pax Romana. The Roman peace. 2 full centuries of remarkable stability and prosperity. Now, here's where the history gets strange. The Colosseum, still standing in Rome today, seated 50,000 people. But it was not even the largest entertainment venue in the city. That was the Circus Maximus, a chariot racing track, and it held 250,000 people. Chariot racing, not gladiatorial combat, was Rome's true national obsession. The gladiators themselves were not quite what most people imagine. They rarely fought to the death. They were too expensive to train, essentially the professional athletes of their time. Roman women reportedly collected their sweat, sold in small vials, as a token of admiration. Then there were the emperors. Augustus was disciplined and brilliant. His successors were considerably less predictable. Caligula came to power at 25 and began his reign to enormous public enthusiasm. Within a year, that enthusiasm had turned to terror. He reportedly fed prisoners to wild animals, held conversations with the moon, and attempted to appoint his favorite horse to one of the highest offices in Roman government. He was assassinated by his own bodyguards after less than 4 years in power. Nero murdered his own mother. He is widely associated with the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, and then seized the burned land to build himself a palace that consumed a significant portion of the city center. When he was finally driven from power, he reportedly wept that the world was losing so great an artist. Then he killed himself. Marcus Aurelius, philosopher, soldier, and the last of the 5 good emperors, wrote a book of personal reflections that is still read and admired nearly 2,000 years later. But when he died in 180 AD, he left power to his own son, Commodus, a man who believed he was the living reincarnation of Hercules. Commodus spent his reign staging gladiatorial battles that he always won, because his opponents were simply too frightened to fight back. With the death of Marcus Aurelius, something shifted inside the Roman Empire, something it would never recover from. Between 235 and 284 AD, Rome cycled through at least 26 emperors, most of them killed by the very next man who wanted the job. Currency was debased. Inflation spiraled. Plague swept across the empire. The borders buckled under the pressure of Germanic tribes pushing from the north, and a resurgent Persian empire pressing from the east. The Emperor Diocletian eventually recognized what everyone around him could see, that no single man could govern an empire this size anymore. So in 285 AD, he divided it, a western half and an eastern half, each with its own emperor, its own capital, and its own fate. It was a practical solution, but it also accelerated the West's decline. The eastern half was wealthier, more defensible, and commercially thriving. The West was poorer, harder to protect, and increasingly dependent on barbarian soldiers to fill the gaps in its armies. When the Emperor Constantine moved the imperial capital east, to Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, in 330 AD, the city of Rome was left behind, literally and symbolically. The end came slowly. In 410 AD, the Visigoths sacked the city of Rome itself, the first foreign enemy to breach its walls in 800 years. Provinces slipped away one by one: Britain, Spain, North Africa, Gaul. In 476 AD, the last Western emperor, a young man named Romulus Augustulus, whose name carried the weight of both Rome's legendary founder and its greatest emperor, was quietly deposed by a Germanic chieftain named Odoacer. Odoacer did not even bother to replace him. He simply sent the imperial crown to Constantinople and declared himself king of Italy. Not a battle, not a great fire, not a heroic last stand. Just a young man handed a pension and quietly exiled to the Italian coast, while the world that Rome had built reorganized itself around his absence.